Hey everyone, my name is Justin Woodring, and this is Computing Science with Justin Woodring. Today we'll be taking a look at a practical, basically guide or introduction to using CSS. This is going to be a coding tutorial. Basically assumes really no beginner knowledge, perhaps a little bit of familiarity with HTML itself. That's about it. So let's get started. Okay, so I'm in VS Code here, and if you want to follow along, that's cool. Basically, you just need to go grab this live preview extension by Microsoft, install that, and then come back here, and you can say right-click there and say show preview. So now I've basically got a live server. That's nice because once you have a basic template HTML file like this, and you can just copy this directly. It'll show changes on the right immediately, which is really nice. So like I said, this is more going to be a CSS tutorial than an HTML tutorial, but we do need a little bit of HTML to get started, so I'm just gonna lay out a boilerplate, just a boilerplate kind of bare bones skeleton HTML, and then we're gonna style it. So first we're going to do some kind of and you can do yours differently if you want to, but here we'll be doing, and of course, like I said, just feel free to follow along. Actually, sorry, this class. So class names are actually really useful, and I generally use them for styling everything in CSS. They're probably the best way to refer to something that you don't like. We'll talk more about that later, but it's probably the best way to refer to various elements of the page semantically. There's a couple special HTML elements you can use as well, but I probably still prefer using classes if possible, sometimes in combination. So anyway, we'll go ahead and do class article, and if property like this. And again, you can name these differently. This is just kind of what I'm familiar with doing. So go ahead and throw an image in here. An image. So my article is going to be a fake article about Paris. Doesn't really matter. You can throw any image you want here. Pexels is pretty good for that. So I'll just keep going here. Let's see. And I can go ahead and put an image container around this. And the other thing that's important to remember here is that while we're doing this, HTML obviously is what you'll always HTML is what you'll be styling if you're using CSS, but it's rare to just edit CSS or HTML directly like this. Typically, it's going to be coming from some other source that gets formatted into HTML these days. That's beside the point because we're here to learn about CSS. So details, and then finally do this. It's going to contain probably one or more H2s and Ps. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some lorem ipsum text here. Everyone's favorite for styling random or for prototyping web pages. Yeah. We got about 3 separate paragraphs here, so we'll go ahead and break these up. And so some of the stuff we'll be looking at here, again, this is almost never how you'd format text on an actual page because Again, it's going to be coming from somewhere else. So you would never really be editing HTML raw like this, at least rarely, unless you're working with like a custom PHP website or something like that. And even then, you're probably going to be echoing the content onto the website. So, yeah, and then we'll say that let's do something like H6 or something like that. Just like estimated reading time. It's common for these article things, right? 3 minutes. Or something like that. And it probably would, maybe not capitalize the T and the R if we wanted it to look more normal. So, maybe more like 3 minutes. Yeah, so maybe you might just say 3 minutes by itself, and it's kind of assumed that it's the estimated reading time. And then like you might do like a dash, 900 words type of thing. And so that's kind of common to see maybe down by the bottom of a photo. And then up here, we'll go ahead and do article header Y. There's it's cool. And in here we'll say, I went vacation. Fun and why you couldn't go because it's all mine. There we go, perfect. So it's gonna be kind of like, if we just look at the website now, this is what we got, right? We got kind of like this generic website. The image is floating off the side, so who knows what's happening there. And then, other than that, it's horribly styled, as you can see. So what can we do to fix this? Obviously, I think probably before we even do that, maybe we should add some kind of like header to the website itself, because this is just an article by itself. So, typically up here you'll see either someone put like a nav or or a div wrapping a nav or something like that. So we'll go ahead and do that as well. And then class equals nav in the something like that. And then inside of that, you may put the actual nav with some links about, sometimes it's just like the logo or something like that. Trip reviewer. And then that's like a link. So, what are some, given this website, what can we do to actually make it look decent? And that's the thing, right? Because so typically, this is probably what a website's not going to look too far different from if, it doesn't actually load any CSS. Yeah, so that was a weird kind of graphical glitch thing there in the recording. But so if your CSS doesn't load properly, right, this is probably what you'll see for a website. So what we can do is, now that we have all these classes here, as you can see, I've added all these classes for a reason. We can go ahead and start styling them. And then we'll talk about some of the properties of CSS again, assuming that you're not familiar with CSS itself. Obviously, this is the first thing we should discuss. Link rel style sheet. This basically loads style sheets. They are actually important in the order that they're loaded in, because the style sheet that gets loaded last is the one that takes precedence over all the others, which means if they have conflicting styles, then we're going to have to load the last one. That's an important note. If you're beginning, you probably won't be really dealing with multiple style sheets, but it's common, especially when you start dealing with other frameworks like Bootstrap and stuff like that, that you may have to override styles, and you may want to use your own style sheet to do that. So let's go ahead and actually look at some CSS. one of the first things, absolute first thing, is almost in any given case whatsoever, you need to know about element selectors, and you are probably going to want to get rid of this nasty padding that goes around everything on the website, especially as you start trying to make themed parts of the website. And I'll show you what I mean in a second. So first, again, let's talk about the element selector here. Basically, I have elements on the page named body, and I also have this HTML element. We can do specific things like set background colors on them. So if I didn't want my background color to be white, which you actually probably do want to stick with at least close to white colors for a good bit of the website, but there's some websites that use dark themes, and that's fine. I don't know if I want my website to be cornstalk forever, but it's, easy to discuss at least. Colors can take multiple formats, so you can either use these HTML color codes, which are fancy. You can use RGB format, which looks like this and goes from 0 to 255. Or you can use the hexadecimal version of RGB and go like, this is going to be red and it's going to look ugly. But the point is, if you know a hexadecimal code, you can just use that. So I'm going to set this back to white for now. And then let's go ahead and look at our navigation. So in navigation, we have a nav. So if we go ahead and turn off caps lock here, we'll go to our navigation, set background color to blue. So this is what I mean by that nasty padding. If you're wondering how to make this white thing go around our blue navigation bar go away, then you're going to need to add some more properties to body and HTML. To be honest, when I started with CSS, I originally Bootstrap is what I used. Well, I used CSS before I used Bootstrap, but it took me a long time to realize that this padding was actually coming from this default styles that are applied to the body and HTML elements. So you can just do something like padding equals 0, and then margin equals 0, and we'll talk about those two. But padding equals 0, margin equals 0. Look at that. Magically, everything is actually aligned with the edge of the page now. Still have some other issues to fix, like for example, our image goes off the side of the screen. We don't really want that. That's a problem. But just keep moving on. So what does padding mean? Padding is the spacing inside of an element, and margin is the spacing outside of an element. So in the case of our navigation, our dot navigation thing here, if we add a margin of 5 em, then you can see that we're basically pushing around the box 5 em, and em is a unit that's approximately, it's related to the font size. It's so it's a variable unit to some extent, but it's by default approximately about 12 pixels. You could use pixels if you're more familiar with, or if you're more comfortable with that, but em is generally more accessible because if someone increases font size, then the thing will change with it, and that's nice. And you typically are going to want that because you want your entire web page to scale. So when you're working with CSS, a lot of it's just about trying to design something that looks good but also is functional. So if you have a bunch of hard-coded pixels, then like hard-coded pixel widths and stuff like that, then if someone resizes your page or changes the general viewport size, it may not play well with your application. So like I said, if we talk about em, then you can see again, as I'm discussing here, how it pushes around the object. You can be more specific, like margin.top is 5 em. And it's pushing down 5 em now. Padding, on the other hand, is actually inside the element. So if we think of navigation as a box, margins what pushes around the box, and then padding is the space inside the box that it gives to its children elements. So in this case, trip reviewer, which you can barely see here, is our only child element. But if we add 5 em padding inside, then you can see that trip reviewer is now almost in the center here, or is effectively in the center vertically, and it's pushed off to the left. But we have a lot more to do because our web page actually looks like it's just getting worse. So let's talk about percentage sizing. So First of all, there's a couple other concepts we need to be familiar with, which is display, and this basically um, changes how the content is actually formatted onto the page, right? So displaying inline is effectively saying that your object is going to display like it's a text character. And it doesn't mean like so certain properties like width and height don't mean anything to it. You can't really give, a text character width and height. You can give it a font size, but not width and height, which also means that while a box displays inline might have something like padding, it's not going to have something like margin. And it's probably better to just know these things than to try to debate about why they are true. Again, you can kind of think of it inline like inline with text. Display block is how most objects default. Obviously, text defaults to displaying inline, but block is how most things will display automatically. So when you display block, you can use things like percentage sizing. And percentage sizing is going to take into account the percentage of the width of its container, assuming that its container is sized block or a display block. So in this case, we're basically saying that we want the width of this to be equivalent to filling up the container. And just as soon as I probably turn off one or more things that's causing it to render poorly, we should get what we want. Oh, okay. No, it's rendering correctly. The image is just going out of bounds. So you can see that it actually is the size of the web page itself exactly. So it's taking up the full space. And now we would normally expect a navigation to do this, but we can also do something cooler like 50%, 25%, and what have you. So anytime that you have a definite width or definite height, you can use these percentages effectively. And so since height is rarely definite, unless you supply definite height to some other part of the page, you can't really do something like height 100% here. But we can do height 5em, and that's fine. And typically, that's what you'll see a lot of pages do. Stick some arbitrary height on there with the ability for it to resize. So let's talk about that. As far as heights go, we have a couple different properties. There's min height, max height, and then height. So height more or less just says that it should be this, and it should always be this. Min height says that it should at the bare minimum always be this height, but it has room to expand if stuff inside of it starts to fill up. So like if Trip Reviewer all of a sudden got this little link here got really large, then the block should be able to expand and it will be fine. So we can go ahead and find a little A here. So we go. So we have a nav in the page, right? So I'm going to address it by an element. You can address children as well, using basically a hierarchy. So like this basically says go in and find the immediate child, and then grab that A. And then we're going to apply some rules like one, we don't want the color to be blue because you can't see it. Font size, right? So as I was saying, if I want to be much larger, you can actually use these things like larger. I prefer to use EM again. You could use pixels if you want to. I wouldn't recommend that. So we could do like 5 EM, which is huge. As you can see, as I increase the EM, this block is resizing, and that's what we want. And why do we want that? Well, typically when we're designing a responsive UI, we want to be able to collapse the web page. So you should be able to resize it like this, and it should not look like garbage whenever it gets smaller. That way you can view it on your desktop or on your mobile phone, and it still looks good. So let us continue. Well, we don't have much in the header right now, so it's fine if we make, this is a trick. If you just set an A, or really anything, obviously like A is typically display inline, but if you set it to display block, you can give it a finite width and height. And from that, if the nav that it's in is, there's another display mode that's pretty important, and that's flex, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if the container it's in is displaying flex, then we can use a cool property, margin auto, to make it almost center. Let me go ahead and remove this here, and then we should need to give a height to the navigation itself. So This thing should go height. And as long as we can make this nav box basically take up, so we can make this nav box take up, if we set this to 5 EM, it should also work actually. There we go. So if we do, let's set min height. There we go. So if we set the nav to min height of 5 EM, and then navigation to min height of 5 EM, basically if the nav gets bigger, which it shouldn't, but if it did, then the navigation will get bigger. And the A inside of it is actually basically pushing margins outwards to center itself. So it's pushing a margin this way, vertically below it, and to the right. And that's what's done with this margin auto property. Normally, you can use a block element to, and margin auto really only works left and right, but in a flexbox container, and that is this container that's using display flex as opposed to display inline or display block. In a flexbox container, you can do this kind of centering. So let's style our trip reviewer app a little bit more. Blue obviously is an awful color, especially this shade of blue. I'm gonna try to just eyeball some better colors here. I don't like any of these. Okay, I mean, theoretically it's possible we could have an app that uses these colors, but I don't like them. Let's do something probably a bit more tasteful here. We'll set the background to white, and then we're going to add a border to it. So as you can see, our nav is actually formatted in white right now, so you can't really see it, but we can make it black. Let's make it black so that it's not blue, and that hideous blue. And then how do we get this stupid thing to go away? Well, we can use the text decoration property to make this go away. We just say none. So A's, these A links automatically have a property assigned to them. This text decoration, and it's text decoration underline, I believe. Yeah. So you don't really want that on a link that is supposed to be formatted pretty. So typically people will just either assign a color, or in this case, because it's kind of also our logo, we're going to try to remove the coloring stuff from it altogether. But what can we do about separating the navigation from the rest of the page? Well, as I said, there are some ways to address that. And that first would probably be applying a border to it. We just do border dash bottom. You can use border itself, but border dash bottom's easier. 1 pixel of solid CCC. So I'm using hexadecimal code here. And so now we kind of have a application that at least somewhat separates its, but for a logo, it's a little small. It could be bigger. So we'll go ahead and increase the font size to 1.2. 1.2 EM. Maybe 1.5 EM. Okay, perfect. And then again, this is the default font. How do we fix that? Well, you can import fonts using something like Google Fonts, which is a CDN. There's a specific syntax for it. You can get the link generated for you. If you just go to Google Fonts, you can find something. I'm gonna go find something that's probably sans serif font that doesn't look, like serif or like a normal serif font, because well, I want something that looks prettier, especially for my company / website logo. Yeah, so I found, let's see, this font here. It's called Playwright India. And so I'm going to get the embed code on the website. You wouldn't be able to see this part, by the way. I'm not showing it, but you can just go to their website and they'll give you the link for embedding it into the website. So this is a special CSS syntax import code here. And so now it won't do anything just yet. I have to actually assign the font somewhere. So I can use font family, this, and it's literally choosing a family of font. Since I'm importing Playwright India, I should be able to specify that here. And now we have trip reviewer. Cool, yay. So our website's starting to look a little bit better. Almost like if you visited this, you wouldn't immediately be scared until you saw the rest of the website. So why is Paris cool? I don't know why Paris is cool, but I'm also not going to bother reading about why Paris is cool when the website looks like this. So let's continue. So if we look at our article and content structure here, basically we can separate the content in the article. So what's the first thing we want to do? Well, probably in general, what you're going to want to do is apply some amount of padding to the left and right of this. I know we removed that from the body, but trust me, you still want to remove, you want to have a line here that runs all the way from left to right, but later on you're going to want something like this to not be all the way at the side. So let's go ahead and add some basic width to this, and I'm going to say 80% is typically what I use. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but if we style the web page properly, class 80%, yeah. So it is 80% right now, by the way. You can see that here it is 80% because it's, well, yeah, it's basically just kind of chopped off the page. The image is still not playing properly, and that's fine. We'll get there. We have to talk about the image. So I'm going to margin auto, right? And this is what I was saying earlier about how margin auto, when it's not in a flexbox container, is only going to center from left to right, and that's fine. So our website all of a sudden just looks so much better. Let's continue even further. So let's fight the image a little bit. So we have an article header, and then an article image, and inside of that, an actual image. So you can kind of nest these things together, or you can address them independently. By the way, brief notation that I probably forgot to mention earlier: dot in front of your various things you're addressing means you're addressing the class name. If you use something like this without a dot, it means you're addressing the actual element. And then finally, there's actually another syntax you'll see. Sometimes it's less common, but it's an ID. And the idea here is that class is probably meant to be used more than once, and it's a bit more generic, and ID is very specific. So it's uncommon to see styling that uses IDs these days, but you will still see it from time to time. Most of the time, everything just uses classes, especially with how much JavaScript there is and everything, and like kind of site generation there is. But if you wanted to use an ID, you would do this, and then in your CSS or in your HTML, you do like a something like this. Most important, and you can do something in, or actually like there's other ways to address this, but and I'll talk about that too. But like for example, maybe our first one, you might be IDing your first paragraph for some reason. Graph important. Yeah, that's a terrible name for it, but just saying, like, there's one of the benefits is that if you did it this way, you could do something like paragraph important and like set the color to red for some reason. I don't know why you do that. It's awful, but just saying there's a way to do that. Also, some other ways to do that, for example, and this is getting more into advanced CSS, but we could do something like basically address the article dash content class, or basically div slash class, go into it, and then select the first. So we select P. And normally, if you did this, it would only address P's that are in the article.content. But what we can also do is say P first child. Actually, would that be right? Is it P colon first child? No. Not first child. You want to do P first of type. There we go. And so, what does this mean? Well, basically, it's saying that once we go into article content, the first P we see, the first P element we see, we can do first type. You can also combine this with like class names and stuff like that. So if you had something that was classed and then you wanted to address the first instance of that, you could do that. And so there's a lot of these weird little accessors here that you can do stuff with. As you can see, there's quite a few. Some of them are like focus, right? What does that mean? Well, it means that if it was like a form element and you clicked on it, it would have focus. And so this is not a form element, so you can't really do that. But if it were a form element, you could do stuff like hover. This one's a common one for links. So people typically apply these to the A elements, but you can see that if we hover over them, then now they're turning red. So that's kind of a couple common-ish ones you'll see. But yeah. Anyway. So moving on, let's work on the image for now, as I said earlier, and it got sidetracked. So we have our article image, or is that right? Yeah. And so we're going to want to make sure that the width of this is 100%, obviously makes sense. But we also need to address the image inside of it. So article image. This thing is not playing by any rules right now. So first thing you need to do is apply 100% to it. And that actually looks pretty good right off the bat. So there's a couple neat things you could do to kind of make this look a little better. And for images, adding a tiny border radius can make your web page appear less blocky. So we'll give it like a 0.1 EM. As you can see, it's just barely noticeable. I can make it more dramatic so you can see it first, but you know, if you just slightly, you know, just like a 0.2, 0.3, something like that, makes it look, pulls the look together a lot more. And honestly, the website's already starting to look so much better. But there's still some more we can do. So one of the things is probably we look at our headers. We're using H2s here, and that's fine, but you may want to use a different header font than a text font or something like that. I see this kind of thing. People will do stuff like that. And then also we have like this thing, which I would really prefer to be styled differently. Most of the page I want to see in sans serif. So again, you can supply sans serif from Google Fonts, or you can just tell it to use the system sans serif, and usually it will use one that's approximately close to whatever's supported on your system. Like Sego, Tahoma. These are kind of like font families. They're very similar to each other. So this is actually in the navigation. We don't want to use that here. But we could say we could use this for like inside the article. We want to use almost exclusively this font. And so, not the article image, the article itself. So we have to add another here. So, okay, it's getting better, but there's still some stuff that's, I guess kind of like, you know, maybe screams out is like it's just something wrong about it. And one of the other things is commonly people believe that their text is actually all black. It's usually not on any website. You know, almost any website you visit, the text isn't all black. It's a near black. Usually it's like a little, it's a slightly tinted blue or slightly tinted brown. So like it'll be like 223 or something like that. Maybe like 112 or something in terms of hex codes. It's typically will make the text a little bit softer and seem more polished than you can kind of see that it's almost a little bit blue there, but not quite. It makes it look a little more polished, and then you can go to warm route as well, and you can see that you may see that as well. I prefer the blue one typically for most of the stuff I do, and so we're getting there. Let's go ahead and look at the H6. Why does our H6 have so much padding on it in the margin? Well, all header elements start off with a lot of padding, so you really have to style them the way you want them in order to make them behave normally. And the other thing I would want is for an H6, maybe for, you know, again, I'm addressing rather generally here. Typically, you should use classes for these things because otherwise it's, you know, it might not do what you want. But, especially if you have a lot of the same types of elements on the page. But in this case, we are using article details. And then inside of that, we can be more, well, I can't really do that. That's SAS actually. That's a extension of language that is pre-processed. So you can look in this CSS or SAS if you want to see more fancy features. But CSS is plenty powerful by itself. It's just a different syntax. I'll go back here and then grab this. And then, so another one we can use is text align. This is really useful for moving text to the other side of a, basically changes the alignment in terms of like justification. In fact, some people may use justify, like if you're reading a news article, typically, or not typically, but sometimes you will see the text formatted in a justify format as opposed to a left aligned format. So we can actually do that with our text in the article text block. So if we go into, or sorry, article content block. So go article dash content. You could do text align justify. As you can see, that actually already makes it look much better. So, you know, looking at this, I think the website's starting to come together. Let's talk about the H's. So the H2s instead of the H. So if we take our H2s, we don't want them to have so much margin on them. And really they don't need too much padding either. So we'll go ahead and take all of that off. And then the P's have their own padding and margins as well. So that needs to be addressed. And you kind of have to play with these numbers a bit until you get it to look the way you want the website to look, right? Obviously, you probably don't want it to look like this, but it's normal. Like, if, for example, you began every P with an H2, then, you know, you'd probably put the margin on the bottom of the P or the top of the H2. So in this case, we could do margin at bottom is 2EM. This is going to tell. As you can see, I'm kind of combining a couple rules here. You may want your H2 to have a little bit of padding on the bottom of it, or, you know, so that it looks a little better. I'm using REM. So let's talk about that real quick. REM is one I like to use. EM, the EM font scale changes based on when you add the font size. So if I do 2EM, then if I make this 5EM, then the padding will increase with it, because basically changing the font size changes the definition of EM itself. And this has a cumulative effect if you nest through elements, assigning like double EM multiple times. So one way to resolve this is REM is defined as the standard EM unit, which means that if you use like Control+ on the page to zoom in the page, then it'll increase the way that an EM should, but otherwise it's the standard 12 pixel definition of like normal 12-point font on the page, basically, and it stays that way. So it's a little bit more of a constant. So that's typically what I use for things that I'm not sure about. So padding, the rule is going to apply all the way around, so we really only want to apply padding to maybe the top and the bottom. And you could do this by either supplying something like 0, 2, or like 1, or you could supply all 4. And this is going to go from the top clockwise. So basically, if we go all the way around, so like that, and then yeah, so 1, and then we want to like 0.5 on the bottom or something like that. And so yeah, and then, you know, maybe you actually don't want any on top. Actually, you know, I think that probably looks a little better, and maybe like just 1 on the bottom here. And I think, you know, this is kind of cool. So all around, our page looks pretty good. So what's the last thing this page needs? Well, there's a lot more to be done if you want to do it, but for now, because obviously I have to wrap up this video eventually, the last thing I want to add is some kind of basic footer to the bottom of the page. So add class equals footer. And so footer can contain a lot of different things in it. In this case, we're basically just going to copy the code for our navigation and then put something else in it, like a copyright statement or something like that. It's very, you know, kind of like, you know, there's not much to it. So in this case, we'll be doing a copy of the navigation and nav code here, and then do footer. Typically, the footer should actually contain, you know, some kind of like links to things that are like about us and privacy policies and stuff, but since this is a fake application, it does not matter. So you could do the border dash top instead if you wanted to. Footer, and then just make a second one here. Footer. Inner. And so let's replace this nav element here, and then grab another thing. Private or about, or something like that. Whatever you want to put in your footer. You probably won't have the font family down there. That's fine. So and this. So what else are we missing? Well, we're missing a little bit of styling on the A. So in this case, we don't really have the A. We have just some text inside. So, well, we do have an A actually, but we need to particularly address the fact that the footer inner is what's wrapping the A. So there you go, about us. Yay. Yeah, and normally the footer is probably going to be like, you might make the footer black, something like that. Like, it's common to have the footer be different than. So our links will be white. And then, of course, you still probably want your font family to be some kind of sans serif. Yay. And then probably footers also have much smaller text. And then you may actually like right or left align it. Typically, I see footers are right aligned, but not all the time. And so this is also one of those cases where it's useful to have a total width on, like, you can set a width inside so that it stays black on the, you'll see what I mean. So, percent. So you can see we kind of have a problem here, right? We want to center this thing, but kind of hard. Who wants their website to look like this? So what we can do is take this up here, put the text up here. So now it's centered. And then what we can do inside of here is, instead of saying margin auto, we can do margin 0, margin auto, and actually the other way around. I'm going to do 0 and auto. There we go, perfect. So now our about us is on the right. And again, you can move to the left or whatever you want. But I think we have a much better looking website. Hopefully, you learned some things while following this. So yeah, thank you for watching. I'm probably gonna be posting some more of this stuff in the future. I hope this was kind of more of a practical guide to using CSS. Maybe you kind of learned a little bit along the way. And yeah, until next time.